Plot, Only Lore, a podcast about games and the tables we play them at. Your DMs tonight, and every night, are Josh and Chris. You can find us on all podcast platforms, or check us out at noplotonlylore.com. If you like what you hear today, please rate and review the show, and share it with everyone you've ever met.
Okay, welcome back to No Plot Only Lore, everybody's favorite show about Dungeons and Dragons. If you favorite listening to me and Chris.
It's my favorite show about Dungeons and Dragons.
So we've talked a lot about Dungeons and Dragons as a game. Let's talk about what Dungeons and Dragons means when you talk about the setting, because there's a lot of settings, and some are good, and some are Greyhawk.
I mean, Greyhawk has its place. Greyhawk has its place. It's fine for what it does.
Yeah, but there's a general sort of knowledge of what Dungeons and Dragons is in popular culture as a general theme and setting. There's certain creatures and archetypes of characters and things like that are generally known. But there's a lot of different ways to play D&D or play official D&D. I mean, we're going to stick to talking about things that have been published in books for real. But I think it comes back to sort of the rule zero of Dungeons and Dragons that this can be whatever you want. So feel free to mix and match and what have you. But that leaves too many options for us to talk about in a concise way, because it's literally just let's talk about everything they've ever printed and then tell you to figure it out yourself. Let's talk about some stuff that's got some boundaries on it and some settings. So
For sure.
we'll start with the classic. So 99% of the time when you think of D&D and what D&D is and where it takes place and the kind of things that happen in it, you're thinking of
Greyhawk.
The Forgotten Realms. The Forgotten Realms.
The Forgotten
Greyhawk is the realm that should be forgotten.
Forgotten Realms is it's the GOAT. It's the one that has been around the longest. It's the one that has the most fiction. It's the one that if you're going to play a video game about D&D, unless it's Planescape Torment, you're probably playing in the Realms. It's the greatest of all time.
Yeah, there are a couple of major places and settings that have really helped define the realm. Neverwinter being one, along with the Neverwinter Nights games.
Yep.
Baldur's Gate and the Baldur's Gate games being the other, that really have helped establish the Forgotten Realms as the default setting.
Stuff like Undermountain too, right? Like a couple of the big modules that they put out were really influential in setting up the realms as like the place to be.
Yeah,
and I think probably Undermountain is the big one, just because it's so evocative of like what a dungeon is and what a dungeon can be. It's just this like never-ending "a wizard did it" thing, which is just fantastic to try and play around in. Yeah.
There's also other big ones are the Temple of Elemental Evil, and then the big bad one was the now the name is just gone from my tongue. Super sucks. It's just endless traps and you are going to die.
Oh fucking hell, I've forgotten it too. Editor Christopher, edit this out.
That one that's super bad. The murder death pyramid. Oh,
worst dungeon of all time. D&D. Go. Oh no! Now I'm getting like Tomb of Horrors.
Tomb of Horrors. That's the
Tomb
one.
of Horrors.
Tomb of Horrors, the one that made it so every group has to have a rogue, which they super don't. But Tomb of Horrors, you should have two. So these are some classic perennial adventures. They get reprinted all the time. They get modified to the new editions, and they're all set in the Forgotten Realms.
All right. So what is your favorite thing? Not necessarily like a dungeon or a place, but like what is your favorite like milieu aspect of the Forgotten Realms?
Okay, so I guess my favorite thing about the Forgotten Realms is that there's nothing incredibly specific about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it can kind of do anything and be anything, and you can just say you're in a different area. If I had to pick something like specific to the Forgotten Realms, I would probably say the like Frost Maiden, Neverwinter type stuff up in the north.
Okay.
But
What about your least favorite? What's your least favorite thing about the realms?
my least favorite thing about the realms is that everyone plays there. It's fine but like I find people who play in the Forgotten Realms are much less willing to get weird with D&D and be creative in what things could mean. They just want to play with like fantasy stereotypes. So, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It just gets samey after a while. I want to try something weird and new interpretations on things. And I find, like if I'm going to homebrew something a little bit weird, I can use the Forgotten Realms like rule set as a good base for everything if I want to. But I actually find there's a setting we're going to talk about later that I prefer to use as my like generic canvas for weirdness, because I like the way the world works better.
So I kind of flip that. That's actually one of my favorite things about the realms is that everybody plays there, and the reason for that is because it works as such a fantastic shorthand. Right, like if you need to jump into a game quickly, and like again coming into it from like an organized play standpoint, if you sit down and you've got the Forgotten Realms on tap, everybody knows what you're talking about right away, right? And you have an expected amount of knowledge and lore about the Forgotten Realms. Like you can throw out a name like Elminster or Mystara, and everybody's going to know what they're talking about.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So that's very helpful in getting games started for me. I think my least favorite thing about the Forgotten Realms is the color palette. Everything is so drab and like dark and brown.
Yeah. Yep. I was going to say brown.
Browns and grays, unless you go into like the Underdark, and then everything is like black and blue.
Yeah, y'all like that sepia tone? Woo!
Right? So yeah, art direction on the Realms, not my favorite thing. But yeah, and then the characters. I think the characters are an interesting thing that I avoid like the plague.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that like there have been several characters that have become sort of foundational to the setting, which I think is an interesting thing to do over time with your setting. And they've even done stuff like similar to that, like in more recent editions, introducing like characters from like live play shows and series as like actual characters in the world that you can reference. But it's also I find it a little bit limiting in a way that I this you're not going to like this comparison, but in the way that like more modern World of Warcraft tends to have the story. Well, it's okay. Let me.
I laughed because you like prefaced that with like a warning because of my visceral reaction to all things World of Warcraft. I don't actually hate World of Warcraft. I just think that it's silly that you like it as much as you do.
Well, and here's the problem: is that I like a certain like almost like era of World of Warcraft a lot.
Yeah.
Everything after Cataclysm, I think, is kind of dog shit. But we'll go into that later. But my main problem with like the storytelling these days in World of Warcraft, because I was a huge World of Warcraft lore nerd. Like I read all the books, I did deep dives on the history of the planet, and it's gotten downright silly. But the biggest problem that they have in the modern expansion storytelling is that they have basically stopped making the player characters the heroes, and you're sort of sideline protagonists watching these other big figures in the world go through their lives and really impact the world. And like in like the in classic or in not classic, that's a specific thing now, but in vanilla WoW, in Wrath of the Lich King and the Burning Crusade, yes, you were fighting these huge villains, Arthas and Illidan and Ragnaros to a lesser extent, but the reason that these people were being defeated was because of you, the players. You're banding together with your friends, a huge number of friends, to overcome these heroes. And then later it became, okay, well, we're going to be doing the groundwork for these assaults, but like the actual person who's going to go kill whoever isn't
Right.
you. It's this other, oh, now Alex Strauss is going to do everything important in the world. Anduin and Sylvanas are doing everything important in the world. And you're just kind of like annoying people in the background so that they don't get interrupted.
Right.
You
So
know?
you don't get the hero moment. Somebody else gets to take the hero moment, and you're just there to do the dirty work. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like for the Forgotten Realms can sometimes have that problem.
I actually ran into that
Where-
problem in Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
While
yeah.
I was playing Baldur's Gate 3, spoiler alert for Baldur's Gate. I guess I can keep it vague. But there is a moment in Baldur's Gate where you've been playing the game for quite a while. Like I was probably 10 hours in. And like I take my time with Baldur's Gate's games. Like I'm like running around and checking literally everything I can click on.
Yeah.
But there was a point where one of those big name characters showed up.
Yeah.
And my initial response to that person being on my screen was, oh shit, that guy? Why doesn't he fix everything?
Right. Because he can.
Because he can.
Yeah.
Right? Like he's got the cred, he's got the connections. The stuff that we're doing is of world-shaking, earth-ending magnitude.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason for this person to not become involved.
Yeah.
Right,
Except
and-
he's not. for
Except he's
whatever
not.
reason.
And that they like hand wave it and they give it like a cute little like explanation in the background. But like there is no reason that this person would not be solving this
Oh,
problem.
and it definitely feels very hand wavy. Like,
Yeah.
Just like, whatever.
Yeah, it really does. So
Um,
and like I have never really liked Drizzt. I've never
Yeah.
really liked Elminster as a character. And I think part of it is that like I have problems with self-insert fiction. Right? Like I
Right.
have difficulty getting over the self-insert aspect of that.
yeah. Well, and
And
I was going to say, Drizzt is so exceedingly like Larry Stew that it's hard. Now, I will say, like, later books did get better. I actually didn't read any Drizzt until there was a trilogy that I guess was written later about his time early in his life in the Underdark before he kind of like came out to the world. And I thought those were actually pretty decent. But then I started reading the earlier stuff and I was like, oh god, this is just like, yeah, self-insert hero journey, or not hero journey, but like, I don't know, you get what I'm saying. Overly heroic. I'm the perfect, I just happen to find the perfect +2 sword of dragon slaying seconds before I fight the dragon. Like, it's all
but also my
Deus
past
Ex
is
self-insert.
dark and mysterious.
Yeah.
I have to
He-
brood
he's-
about everything.
Like, people make jokes about like solo D&D players. And that's what Drizzt feels like. He's like, my name is Zenithal Darkblade, and it's just everything terrible.
And like nothing but love to R.A. Salvatore. Like he is pumping out books. He's one of the hardest workers in the game. His books are consistently quality. I don't like his character.
I would like to rephrase that as his books are of a consistent quality.
Yes, they are of a consistent quality that is above average.
Not, yeah. Well, it's not incompetent.
No.
Anyways, yeah. So characters like him and Bruenor and some of the other hangers on, yeah, they exist, but I find it does limit the setting for them to be so heavily referenced and important to the mythos of the whole setting. Anyways, enough about the basics. Let's start talking about weird stuff.
Yeah. So you've never played Spelljammer.
I've never played Spelljammer.
Okay, so Spelljammer is responsible for one of my all-time favorite D&D imaginary visuals.
Okay.
Right, like imagine for a moment that you are standing on the deck of a ship that is moving at speed through not water, but the ethereal matter that holds the universe together.
Okay, yeah.
And behind you is a sky of pure darkness with tiny slivers of crystalline light that represent the myriad worlds of the multiverse.
Okay.
And each of those, you can sail into it, you can hang out in that world for a little while, you can do whatever adventures you're doing there, and then you take your Spelljammer ship and you fly off into the sky, and then further to whatever your next thing is. I love Spelljammer. Every time I have played it, it has been a delight. I'm not like huge into like multiverse stuff most of the time. I'm not a huge like fan of like crossover fiction, so I don't necessarily want your like Dragonlance in my Magic the Gathering.
Right.
But Spelljammer facilitates that in a really organic way.
Right.
Where
and it seems like it's naturally built towards encouraging you to like encouraging you to be temporarily in those settings. Like, we're here, but we are not going to be very soon because we shouldn't be.
Yeah, it kind of turns the entire setting into one stop along the way of your adventure. Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's very much that you are going there for a reason, right? You need to get a Dragonlance to go and fight the Magic the Gathering dragon. And so to facilitate that, you get in this like crazy ship that has the ability to travel between worlds.
Right, yeah. In order to defeat Nicol Bolas, you'll need a Dragonlance, and who better to wield a lance than a knight from Greyhawk?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, no, it's brilliant, and it gets real fucking weird. Like, real weird. One of the playable races in it is just, like, anthropomorphic hippopotamus people.
Okay.
And they just... those are the folks that man a lot of these Spelljammer ships. And they're lovely.
All right.
Yeah. How do you feel about, like, multiversal aspects to your role-playing games? And or crossovers?
I gotta say, I am not a person who's been traditionally a big fan of, like... I don't mind the odd crossover, but I find that when I'm in a setting for a campaign, I really want to like find a reason to deep dive on that setting. You know, like the cultures and the politics and the, you know, I like to have like when I have a setting, I like to include all of like the normal races that you would expect from like Forgotten Realms, but then give them all weird twists and explore those weird twists in that world. Okay. And I find that like multiversal settings just don't give you enough playtime in those worlds to really explore them. Like I said, you're encouraged to move on every couple of sessions to something new. And spend time adventuring outside of those realms in that like between space, you know? So yeah, I find that like you don't really get a chance to like inhabit the world. You're just visiting.
See, I always like the way that I like to think about it with Spelljammer, and I think Spelljammer is kind of uniquely set up for this in like the multiversal spaces for D&D, is it's a little bit like Star Trek, right? Where you show up with your ship, you've got a problem that needs to be solved, you beam down to the planet, you hang out with that crew of people for like whatever specific issue is happening there for your players, then you beam back up to the ship and you fly off to the next episode. Right.
Yeah. And that's a totally valid way to look at it. I prefer to like set a whole season on the same planet, you know?
Yeah. But then the like other side of it is that the ship itself becomes incredibly important. That becomes your setting, and you get to like almost a microculture, right? Like you get to see the NPCs on the ship and the player characters and how they interact when they're traveling. So it's very much like a travel log style of D&D, which, I mean, sometimes I am just in the mood to go to a planet and get eaten by a moss monster. You know?
Yeah, I don't know. It sounds to me like One Piece the RPG, which like,
I mean,
I don't know.
You're not wrong. And there are a lot of people, and I hope some of them are among our listeners, who would hear One Piece the RPG and go, "Fuck yeah, let's go."
Yeah, and that's great for them. I don't need 1,064 episodes of nothing. So, all right. So let's speaking of worlds that I've put some deep time into, let's talk about Dark Sun. Dark Sun is one of my favorite like alternative D&D settings. Like if I'm not playing by default Forgotten Realms with someone else's group, my world is either Dark Sun or something weird I've based on one of these other later settings. But so Dark Sun is we're going to call it the Grimdark campaign setting.
You don't like that because it's not 40K.
Well, I don't like the phrase Grimdark, but it is sort of appropriate, except it's like bright, exceedingly bright.
The bright
this
dark.
Bright grim. So it is a post-apocalyptic setting, except the apocalypse was magic. It's got a lot of survival elements to it, even survival horror, but the idea is that the setting itself is an antagonist to you, in addition to everything else out there.
Actively trying to kill you at every turn.
Yeah, you mentioned Braum art baked in. I think of it like there's also a lot of like Vallejo influences in this sort of like tough barbarian man versus beast element to it. It's got a lot more I would say like natural elements in its antagonism. So the reality is magic is it's a low magic setting, and magic
like hyper
is
low magic.
Yeah, incredibly low magic, but also incredibly low technology. There's not a lot of metal around, so you've got people using bone and wood and chitin and a lot more natural elements. Like if you wanted to make plate mail, well, those plates would be like a dragon's scales or like the outer shells of a gigantic scarab or something like that, right?
And if you were actually wearing plate mail, you would just bake in it.
Yeah, exactly. like because Dark Sun, there's a huge desert on the planet. Like life has been choked out from this planet, so you spend a lot more time battling natural elements, and you need to take that. I find a lot of people don't take those like little side traveling challenges into their like normal Forgotten Realms setting. They like to kind of gloss over that stuff because it is like just kind of annoying fluff, tracking like rations and stuff like that.
Especially if you can get to like the next city and load back up, right? Like if
and
resources are readily available, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, that stuff is a lot more restricted in Dark Sun, and it's a lot more necessary that you like make sure you have water sources and understand, hey, this is a trip that's going to take a week, and it's a week through the middle of the desert, and I hope you know how to navigate, and I hope you have the right supplies, and like some people are not going to have a good time, and maybe not everyone's going to make it, right? It did get weird later.
It got really weird.
Editions.
I wouldn't even necessarily say in like later editions. The first one has bug people that are player characters. Like you can just be a mantis person.
Yeah, bug people. The herds of running elves, I think, are pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But it also, like, if you actually dive into it, there's a lot of like elements that wouldn't like there's a whole area of Dark Sun that's actually like a lush, fertile area because of the sorcerer king who rules over there and stuff like that. But I think the one major other thing that Dark Sun really emphasized, and we were going back and forth a little bit earlier because I couldn't find like a hard confirmation on this, but Dark Sun is definitely one of the areas that emphasizes the idea of critical failure, specifically when it comes to weapon attacks. I know I'm not as familiar with other settings. I know it hasn't come out in 5th edition, but in 4th edition, if you critically failed an attack with your weapon, it just broke.
Yep.
Because you're using natural materials, and it just caught a bad edge, and your sword splintered. And you better have another weapon as backup, because otherwise you're just flailing, right? But it encouraged a very different style of attachment to your, like, your equipment and your gear as a character. I know that's something that like in RPGs definitely becomes part of the characters, the equipment that they're wearing and the look that they have. I mean, you look through these art books and see, okay, well, I can draw myself in this like wooden splint mail with this like cool sword and blah blah blah, and it becomes really defining to your character. But like Dark Sun really messed with that idea. I mean, first of all, 4th edition, which was the last time that Dark Sun was published, very, very, very heavily emphasized magic weapons and the need for magic items throughout the whole setting. That was one of the big criticisms that people said it was too much like a video game, is that equipment and loot and gear was super, super important. Dark Sun said, none of that's important. You're just using sticks and stuff that are around, but you can get boons from, you know, the gods and stuff like that to give you the same effect. So it really tied it back to like your character's the one improving, not like the things you find on the ground, which I think is a much more interesting way to approach things like gear and magic items. Is like, yeah, they're cool, but they should be super rare. But if mechanically the game needs you to have a +2 weapon, I'd rather just say that your hero has a +2 bonus from the god of +2s than say you went and found this, you know, random sword in a dragon's refuse bin.
Well, and then the emphasis not just on the magic items, but like masterwork items, right? You're not going to make a masterwork dagger out of a bird bone and some twine that you found, right? Like you're going to have a lot of improvised, slapped together weapons that are more or less disposable, and you're going to replace them over the course of any given adventure. So like getting attached to any of your gear is kind of a fool's game in Dark Sun. I've actually seen a bunch of really interesting 5th edition durability systems that kind of borrow from the Dark Sun system. Like it isn't an immediate thing that your weapon breaks, and I don't think it was in 4th edition either. There was just like a chance that your weapon would break if you critically failed. But yeah, I've seen a few different really cool durability systems that have kind of played around with the same idea to try and get away from the idea of like, this is the +7 dagger of ogre slaying that my grandfather gave to me, and then I never have to upgrade my weapon ever again.
Sure. I will say, like, one thing that I always fiddled around with in the setting was like, when they talked about what your weapons were and what they were made of, I really tried to emphasize the idea of weapons similar to like Maori and Hawaiian traditional weapons, and to a lesser extent like Aztec weapons, because they used a lot of obsidian, which is actually like really common in Dark Sun, and so obsidian blades, obsidian teeth in swords and stuff like that, and then like animal teeth and bones, shark teeth and stuff like that. You can always, say, oh, this giant mantis I killed, I'm going to tear its forearm off and use that as a spear or whatever. But I really like the idea that like everyone sort of had to know how to roughly make a primitive weapon based on whatever stuff was around them,
Yeah. All right, so in the exact opposite direction of that, let's talk about knights in shining armor and wizards in flowing robes and the standard fantasy tropes that we have all come to know and love, and the world of Greyhawk.
Yeah, tell me about Greyhawk, because this is one I'm not super familiar with.
So, for a very long time, Greyhawk was the default setting of Dungeons and Dragons. That was true in 3rd edition D&D. It was true in 1st edition D&D. And it's very much like the Arturian legend version of Dungeons and Dragons, right? So like everything that is in D&D, you're going to find in Greyhawk in like its purest, most innocent, naive form. Right? So like your knights are always chivalrous, your like wizards are always cunning, and it's like divided into very like Eurocentric style kingdoms and duchies and like dukedoms and all of this stuff. It was Gary Gygax's original campaign world.
Okay.
And eventually it folded in Dave Arneson's original campaign world, Blackmoor. Gygax made Blackmoor into a country in Greyhawk, and then later destroyed all of the countries in Greyhawk. As I think a little bit of a fuck you to Dave, because I think they were fighting at the time.
Yeah, no shit.
Yeah, those guys. Did you ever meet either of them?
No, I did not have the good fortune to meet them.
I had the pleasure of meeting Dave at Gen Con, the last Gen Con that he went to. I can't remember if it was 2011 or 2012. But, yeah, really great guy, and just wished that he was fishing instead of being at the con.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it was the default setting for the RPGA for many years. The RPGA was an organization of organized play that published campaigns and adventures that you could play in the greater world of Greyhawk. So, like, every region of... I think it was just North America. Every region of North America had its corresponding region in Greyhawk that it was. Yeah. And so you would do your campaign. You would send in your results to TSR at the time, or to the RPGA. I can't remember if TSR was directly involved with the RPGA at the time. But you would send in your results, and then they would send you the next adventure. And sometimes, depending on like the size of the adventure that you were doing or the results of the adventure, stuff would actually change in the world.
Okay.
And that would be like relayed to other people that were playing in the game. So that was pretty cool. I never actually got involved in the RPGA. I was pretty young when it was in its heyday.
Okay. Yeah.
But I always appreciated the idea of like a living world of Greyhawk. And so like it was constantly changing and constantly evolving. Based on what players were actually doing.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess if you really just want to do, like, the generic Arthurian thing, great.
There's a space for that for me sometimes. Like, occasionally, I do just want to have, like, some knights in shining armor go and rescue some princess from a dragon.
Right.
And call it a day. Right?
Yeah, I feel like it's, like... very much it feels just like very old school, like role-playing and fantasy have grown past that setting, but maybe that's just me.
I think that is your cynical postmodern sensibilities bleeding into the sincerity and forthrightness that is Greyhawk.
Okay.
Like,
whatever.
Because I think that, like, if you wanted to do a game where you were taking some of those tropes for a ride, right? Like, you have your knights in shining armor, you have your, like, Robin Hood style rogue or ranger characters, you have your like paladins and your clerics are all like upstanding men of God and that sort of thing. And then just like slowly start to insert some less savory elements. Like, I think Greyhawk would be a great place to do a Game of Thrones style game.
Sure. Actually, I was just thinking, like, if I wanted to convert Tainted Grail, it's just slap it on top of Greyhawk and off you go.
Yeah. So I do think that there's still a place for Greyhawk. I don't know if we have anybody who's really taking advantage of it in that way right now, but I would love to see somebody just take that setting and run with it and like do something really interesting and new with it.
Okay. Well, when they do, let me know. I'll give it a shot. So the next one is like the opposite of Greyhawk. It's Eberron.
Yeah.
So Eberron came about as results of a contest. They were like, boy, we need some creative new settings. Give us your best work. Mm-hmm. I like the quote here, everything in D&D is in Eberron.
Yep.
But it feels like it's just kind of cranked to 11. So the whole setting has a sort of gritty pulp fantasy setting, style, tone. But everything's like steeped in magic. Mm-hmm. You know, magic tech. This is where Warforged as a race were created.
Artificers
Magical
as a class.
robots. Yeah, artificers as a class, which are now like ubiquitous to the setting. Magic nukes. You drop a spirit bomb on someone.
Well, like the entire like history of the setting, Syri, the country of Syri, was destroyed in like a nuke analog.
Yeah, just Vegetaed.
Yeah, yeah. And now it's like the Dreadlands, where like it's surrounded by screaming clouds.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. They, like we sort of coined the phrase magic punk, but it's just it's if steampunk was run on magic, you've got magic trains and you've got magic automatic sweeping brooms and like you got your magic espresso maker, like everything that is conveniently run on like electricity or steam power is just a wizard did it, right?
Unseen Servant would just be the most OP thing in real life.
Yeah, exactly.
100%. Like,
that's the one thing I want.
If I could enchant a broom of Unseen Servant to just like sweep my space once a day.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's called a Roomba.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that you've said that, I'm embarrassed.
It's interesting that you have specifically noted that this is your personal favorite playground, because in sort of a mirror of that, while it's not specifically my personal favorite playground, like as a generic setting, when I make new settings or homebrew some stuff, I kind of start with the Eberron framework. And that's how I kind of like magic and things like that to work in my world, is that I want it to be almost universally I do two things. I do like no magic in Dark Sun, and I do like ultra magic in Eberron. I'm a man of extremes.
I love the Eberron campaign setting. It is absolutely like, I don't always play in a published setting, but when I do, Eberron is the one that I go to first.
Yeah.
I adore Sharn, the City of Towers, as a setting. Is a fantastic place to like build adventures that have kind of a gritty and urban feel. Like the setting is very much like if you took 1920s pulp detective fiction and just threw a bunch of magic shit in there.
Yeah.
Right? So you've got like your hard-boiled detectives who are doing like investigative work, and you've got your gangsters that are just a crew of halflings, like a family of halflings living in the bottom parts of Sharn. You've got like the aristocratic dragonborn houses that are like very over the top in how rich and powerful they are. It's just everything is extremes in Eberron in very much that like 1920s pulp way.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love it. You can go on like adventures to Darkest Africa, right? Like you can hop on an airship and fly to Zendrick for like plundering ancient giant catacombs for treasures, in exactly the same way that in the 1920s we were taking a biplane to Egypt and plundering the tombs of the pharaohs, right?
Yeah. It's got this like Indiana Jonesy type feel sometimes.
Yeah.
And I will say specifically like Warforged are a race that I bring into just about every possible setting I can, and I really like experimenting with the ideas of like golems and automa and what it means to be a person.
Like gives you a chance to play Data.
Yeah, but like Data mixed with like HAL 9000 sometimes, or
a little bit.
Or what was I did one time where my Warforged had to obey Asimov's 3 rules, and it caused problems for the group. But yeah, it was like just an interesting exercise in like, well, what can I do as a Warforged if I'm not allowed to like war?
Yeah.
I'm just forged.
One of my favorite characters that I played. Oh man, we're actually talking about a character that I played.
Hey,
Sometimes I'm not behind the screen. Was a Warforged samurai cop
Okay.
in Sharn, and we were playing through like a very the campaign was inspired by The Wire.
Yeah.
And so like there was a lot of moral gray areas, and my guy was just like, he was the good cop. He was the guy who was just there to help. He wants to serve and protect. He's trying to make sure that everybody's going to be okay. He can't handle all the dirty cops that are running around. He's just got to make sure that everything is like on the up and up.
Yeah.
And he was unfortunately not a lot of fun to play because everybody else in the group, like the players liked the character, the characters hated him.
Right. Yeah.
So it was a difficult character to play through, but very rewarding in some of the storytelling elements that came out of that. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. There's you know, I love taking Warforged because they're not human, and like taking that taking the artificialness of them to some extremes.
Well, yeah, and like the thing that I liked about this cop character was that like he selected his morality.
Yeah.
Right, like he saw the moral options that were available to him, and he went, this one.
Yeah.
This is the right one, so that's the one I'm taking.
Yeah, and it also funnily enough, you can make characters like that have just like there's no like I want to say there's no room for like nuance might be the wrong word, but like they deal because they're a machine, they deal in absolutes.
Yep.
And like that can really, like I said, grate on other players or characters. But I like that sometimes like this is my framework and I can't get outside of my programming. But maybe if you guys got really creative with how you tailored the situation, my programming would accept it because it's based purely on logic or whatever.
Well, and then like one of the other things that I love is that like you have the opportunity to play them exactly the opposite of that, where they're just a person, right?
Yeah.
Like they've always been a person,
a guy, but like that guy can also like remove a hand and put a new attachment on when he needs to.
Yeah, right. Like he has no trouble understanding what it is to be a person because he's just always been a person, right? And so you can contrast those two in really interesting ways as well. So you have the one guy who like is very strict in the way that he was programmed. The people who put him together with like very clear instructions, and then this other guy was just kind of made on a whim.
Yeah.
Right, and he just does what he's doing.
I will say like, and my like I think we should move on after this, but one thing that really impacted like how I create Warforged characters now is playing through Fallout 4 and seeing the different kinds of synths that are out there and how the different synths like process their quote unquote humanity and the level that they accept it, and then the different generations of synths and how they interact with the world and how they are perceived by the world. So anyways, that's been Eberron. Eberron's
great.
We could talk about it all day.
Yeah.
But speaking of something I don't want to talk about all day, Dragonlance.
Dragonlance. I just kind of want to touch on this one briefly, I guess, because like there aren't a ton of differences in the way that Dragonlance presents from Greyhawk.
Yeah.
All of your standard character classes are there. All of your standard like character tropes. You've got your upstanding knights and all of that. They put a bit more effort into the history of the world. I felt like the differentiating it a bit with like the cataclysm and that whole thing. The thing that I really liked about Dragonlance though was the fact that the gods had abandoned us.
Yeah.
Right. Like one of the problems that I have with a lot of D&D campaign settings is that the gods are undeniable. Right.
Yeah.
Like they exist. They talk to you. They occasionally come down and do stuff. And like you can be an atheist in the idea that like the gods are there, they're there, they don't necessarily deserve your worship.
Right. I would say like the gods in like most D&D stuff tend to be kind of like Hellenic gods. Like they come down from Olympus all the time and impregnate swans or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you can't pretend they don't exist because they live over there. That's their house.
And like, who hasn't wanted to fuck a swan, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's the
Every chance I get.
long, slender necks. But like the idea that the gods are more subtle, right? They exist maybe in the background. There's a lot of like doubt about religion in Dragonlance, which was kind of the first time that we had really seen that in a D&D campaign setting, and I really appreciated that, especially looking at like the cleric classes and like the paladins, and trying to figure out like how they would fit into a world with low religion.
Yeah.
Right, like where Forgotten Realms, I guess, would be like a high religion setting where like there are characters who bang gods on the regular. Dragonlance is exactly the opposite, or at least it started exactly the opposite, where you just don't know if the gods actually exist anymore. They might have left forever.
Yeah, yeah. I will say that's another feature of the Dark Sun setting, is that there are no gods. They just nope, no gods, and anything close to godlike power is actually one of these wizard kings who is putting his power into one of his agents. But yeah, no gods, no divine classes.
The gods died of dehydration years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say, like, it's from my perspective, the Dragonlance setting mostly exists to serve the fans of the Dragonlance novels, just so like they can continue their adventures with their BFF Raceland or whatever. I will say I read Dragons of Autumn something
Twilight,
years ago,
yeah.
Twilight, sure, and hated every second of it. And if I could kill that halfling with his own stupid sling stick, I would.
You're not
in
alone.
A heartbeat.
Tasselhoff Burfoot is a very polarizing figure.
Yeah, that is an understatement, to say the very least. I almost applaud the writer for their ability to create the most irritating character I've ever seen on paper.
Okay, but it did get some stuff right? Like, I think, like, if we're looking at the fiction in particular, right? Like, the Draconians, I think, were a great idea.
All right, whatever.
Like, dragon people that later turned into, like, Dragonborn. And I think Dragonborn refined the idea and made it cooler.
Yeah, definitely.
The magical weapon that is specifically designed to kill the apex predator that is dragons.
Right.
Like, that makes sense. If you live in a world where there are dragons, somebody is going to specifically design a weapon to take those fuckers down. Yeah,
absolutely. Like, if you are, an apex predator, as humans are, and there's another apex predator that just out-apexes you, well, you better find a way to out-apex that apex, because otherwise you will be around. So, yeah, like, just procedurally, logically thinking, like, great. And I can't believe it took so long for them to introduce a setting where people were like, hey, you know those big monsters out there? We should have something that's really good at killing them specifically.
Oh, what was that movie with Matthew McConaughey? Hunting dragons.
Oh, Days of Fire? No.
Something like that, yeah.
I might be combining multiple movies, but yeah.
Probably. It's not a very good movie, but the dragon hunting sequence at the beginning was fucking dope.
Oh, yeah, it was absolutely awesome.
All right, so I just want to touch on two more, because I don't think we're going to have time to get through this entire list. And...
No, you know what? I think we should. I think we should get through the 5 we have left.
Okay.
We'll run a little long this week. That's fine.
All right.
We can take an extra 10 minutes.
All right, so this is one of my least favorite things that has happened in Dungeons and Dragons in quite some time.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Magic the Gathering as a D&D setting hurts me right in the feels.
But, Christopher, don't you like money?
I love money, and I feel like diluting your IP by spreading it between two tangentially related products hurts both of those products.
No, and that's the thing. It's this is not like, hey, we came up with a new setting. It's like, hey, what if we got product in our product?
Yeah.
Like it just feels so gross and artificial and predatory. Also, just quick note because it wouldn't leave me. It was Rain of Fire.
Rain of Fire. All right.
Anyways,
And like to be clear, we're both Magic nerds, right? Like,
oh yeah, well, I was.
You were.
I'm clean
You
now. I'm clean. I really appreciate Magic for the game system that it is, and the specificity and detail of rules, and just the construction of it as a game system. I think it's really
beautifully
cool.
designed.
And
Beautifully
I think it's very smart in the way that Magic now is grabbing other IPs and saying, "Look, we have like no here."
I know, I get it. Like, it's a
me-
good marketing move, but I
don't. No,
wanna
I'm not talking
Doctor
about
Who.
marketing. I'm saying like this is the perfect frame for a game, and you can just put your stuff on it. And I don't think it should interact with the rest of the world. Like, I think it should be self-contained. But I appreciate that I now have some version of a game that I can play with cards involving the 40K IP that doesn't suck, right? Like, I can just go buy
All right.
the 4 40K commanders, and then I get to play a card-based 40K game that isn't ass.
We found
And
your motivations. I understand now.
But no, like you know, there's the talks now they're going to do stuff with Marvel. Great.
Yeah.
You should just do that, and we don't need Versus. Because Versus is fine, but it's not Magic.
Or Snap.
Right? So, well, let's not talk about Ben Brode. But, like, you know, I appreciate that they're doing essentially fan service by saying, look, we know this thing is perfect, and I think they would be very well served by having mechanics specific to IPs if they were able to, like, come up with something cool and unique. That would be awesome. And it's like, well, yeah, the only place that, like, for example, like, Reanimate exists is in the 40K IP because there's Necrons, right?
Yeah.
I think if they got more granular that way, and you know, they don't have to release sets that interact with the rest of the product like the Lord of the Rings one did or like the Doctor Who one did.
Yeah.
But I love how clear and like clear and specific and unambiguous the rule set is, and that you can always look up a very specific timing conflict or whatever it is, and you know, bringing that level of game communication and specificity to other board games and card games, I think is it'd be great if they all did it. And if they're not going to do it because they're just contrarians or whatever, then Wizards should spend all of their money just letting people license their game. And yeah.
See,
But anyways,
I think the two big complaints that I have for Magic the Gathering as specifically like a D&D setting is that like the storytelling opportunities that exist in Magic are fairly heavily populated already. Right?
Yeah.
Like the design aesthetic that they were going for a lot of years was a very narrative driven design philosophy where there was like a story that you were playing through, and these were the main characters, and you were playing through this like grand story over the course of the set, and trying to work your characters into it feels a lot like the same thing that you get when you're playing like the Lord of the Rings role-playing game. Where like it's cool that you're doing some fantastic stuff, it's cool that you're going and fighting orcs and shit, but you're not Frodo and you don't have the ring.
Yeah, you're not Frodo, you're not Boromir, you're Finn Diddler from the Shire, and it's like nobody gives a shit about Finn Diddler.
Yeah, and then
like and yeah, like you know, when you're playing Magic, like the Urza saga, you cared about Urza and then his brother, and you know, you wanted to learn about their story. No one gives a shit about random blue mage who's going to sit there and play Force of Will for the next 7 weeks. Like
we're on the Climate Dark, a ship that goes between worlds.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's very parallel storytelling in a way that I feel detracts from what your players are going to be accomplishing. And like I'm sure there are really great stories that you could be telling in these worlds that are separate from those, but I feel like it kind of lends itself to that style of play. And then the second thing is that it feels like it's setting up like the member berries style thing where it's just like here's a reference. Here's that card you liked.
Yep.
Do you want to have Nicol Bolas interact with your characters and make their lives sad? that can happen now. And it's just
hey, you guys remember Teferi and Jace? Aren't they cool?
Oh man, I definitely need to get myself some Liliana up in this.
Hey, remember when you had a crush on Jaya Bellard for like all of 9th grade? Well, she's here and you can talk to her.
And the kids that are still in 9th grade are like, oh shit.
I will also say, like we say the D&D setting, but it is specifically Ravnica, which is like,
okay,
in my opinion, the most boring of the possible settings they could have done. Like, Ravnica is just stealing stuff from other better settings. Like, they could have done Innistrad, which does like the horror stereotypes really well. They could have done like Lorwyn and Shadowmoor and that cool like weird day-night good and evil cycle. I mean, they could have done even like Tarkir or just the generic setting with Dominaria. That would have been more interesting than freaking Ravnica, because I don't know why, but it seems like everything they've done for the last like 5 to 10 years has been like, hey, you guys want to go hit that Ravnica well again? Because people seem to like that. Like, as far as I can tell, they just put out a set that is just a reprint of an old Ravnica set, like word for word with new art.
Well, like, I think
just for collectors.
One of the biggest problems with Ravnica is that it diverges so heavily from the thing that makes Magic the Gathering special. Right?
Yeah.
Like the color pie is such a brilliant idea. And when you're dealing with mixed colors and paired colors, it starts to dilute that. And granted, that creates some nuance. And in a role-playing game world, you do want to have a lot of that where you can get it. But not having those clearly established color identities, I think, detracts from what Magic the Gathering is really trying to push for.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really work for me as a role-playing game setting, and I'm sad that it happened, and I'm never going to buy it.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I will also say, like, we didn't have it on here, but I do want to just briefly touch on Strixhaven.
I've never
And the
played
damage
Strixhaven.
it is. What's that?
I've never played Strixhaven.
You don't have to. It introduced a single spell to the game that has had an outsized warping effect on the rest of the entire game in Silvery Barbs. That is infuriating. Strixhaven it's a MTG setting.
Okay.
But Silvery Barbs is the single most like broken piece of like text block they've ever released, and it's maddening that it came from an MTG source.
If you don't take it, you've fucked up.
Yes, if you have access to Silvery Barbs and you don't take Silvery Barbs, your whole group is at a disadvantage and is worse off. And you are actually served well to have every single member of the group that can take it.
Yep.
It's insane.
It's crazy. It needs errata. Even if it gets errata, it's
sure.
probably not going to do anything. People are still going to take the original wording.
Yep. Okay, let's talk as quickly as we can.
We're out of time.
We're
going long.
Less about
Exandria. All right, Exandria.
Exandria. We managed to avoid talking about Critical Role at all last week, but
that's only because we weren't actually talking about D&D.
We're back now. They should just start calling it Matthew Mercer's Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh man, yeah. If they put like Matthew Mercer and Monty Cook present,
Matthew Mercer presents one D&D.
I have not played Exandria yet.
I'm never going to.
The thing that I think is most interesting about this is the portent of things to come.
Yeah.
Right, like Critical Role has become such a force, and like this is true for Acquisitions Incorporated as well.
Yep.
Right, like these actual play phenomenon are getting big enough that they're getting official recognition.
Yeah.
And they're being published as new game settings that other people can play in, that have access to characters that you've grown to love over like 47 hours of listening to other people play D&D.
Right. Well, and frankly, I'm surprised we haven't seen the Fantasy High people get pegged for tagged to make a source book for that.
I wouldn't be surprised at all to find out that was happening.
Yeah, like maybe that's the big launch right after the new D&D edition comes out.
Yeah. Or like it could be like at the time that we're recording this, they are currently in like a new Fantasy High series. Yeah. Wouldn't be surprised at all to see like a launch of a book as like the end cap.
Yeah, zero surprise.
Right. But like,
anyways, Exandria is whatever.
Yeah, it's fine. I think the biggest selling feature for it is that it's something that people can grok right away. Right.
Yeah.
Like it feels like a very updated Greyhawk. Right. Like it's a much more modern sensibility on that thing. So it's like, instead of looking at the fantasy that was popular in the 1960s, 1970s, it's more based on the fantasy, like the standard ass fantasy of the 2000s to 2020s.
Right.
Right.
It honestly, like, as someone who doesn't watch Critical Role, having like briefly glanced at some of the lore stuff and background stuff for Exandria, I don't know why it exists. Like, it really does not feel necessary, other than like, well, we at Critical Role can now own this thing and exist within that and monetize it, which we can't do with Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk. Like, I don't know why this setting exists, other than like Matt Mercer really specifically wanted to make a couple of tweaks for no good reason, and then now he can own the whole thing.
Which, I mean, like, more power to him. Like,
yeah, sure, but
well done, Matt.
I don't know why you or I or any person who's not Matt Mercer or the cast of Critical Role needs to play in that world.
Because you have listened to somebody play in that world for 300 hours. And
you're right. I guess if you're just getting into D&D and you're like, well, this is the setting that I'm familiar with, I'll do that, then fine, whatever. But
there's an interesting discussion that we should have on a different date about starting D&D in this era.
For sure.
All right, Gamma World. Talk to me about Gamma World.
Gamma World. I bought that's because I don't think anything's come out for 5th edition.
Nope.
But I bought their last version of it for 4th edition, which was, honestly, I was hoping for more. It was only 2 box sets that came out. But Gamma World is like stereotypically 90s, 80s post-apocalyptic weirdness. Like, there's mutants and humanoid animals and conspiracy theories, and it did a few like, over time it went a couple different directions in different versions, but the version I played was very much like, yeah, there's like old advanced tech around, but like it could blow up on you because you don't 100% know why it works.
Yeah, so I did work, like, I did play in one of the earlier editions. One of the things that I liked about that earlier edition is that if you found some of that like ancient tech, it was almost always not going to work.
Yeah.
Right, because like all of the technology that we have today, like if you find a hard drive in 300 years and you don't have something to plug that hard drive into, it's just a funny looking rock.
Yeah. There's so many other things that you well, and that's actually an idea that I'm going to bring it up again, but that comes up in 40K. Is that like after a certain point shut up. After a certain point, like, the maintenance and usage of technology can become so ritualized that it takes on a quasi religious significance, and you don't know why your gun works, but you know that if you apply the holy unguents to the different, points on the gun and say the correct canticles of arming and, move the lever of blessed behavior, it's gonna, when you pull the trigger, something's gonna die on the other end, right? Like, you might not know why you're doing all these maintenance rituals, but you are doing the maintenance rituals to keep the thing running, right? And so that idea in Gamma World, I think, is really fun and cool. Or maybe you'll get something and it works like one time, right?
See, I think the thing that kind of pulls me out of Gamma World is that, like, every time I have played it or thought about playing it, the thing I keep coming back to is that it would be better in a different system.
Yeah.
Right? Like, D&D has some very specific tropes and is balanced in a very specific way to push things like combat and treasure discovery and, like, all of those tropes. And Gamma World feels like it's such a departure from those that it would be better served by a completely different system.
Yeah. There is, like, so one thing that I did really love about Gamma World was that it felt like it was a system that was meant to just jump into a lot faster, especially in 4th edition. You could create a character just by rolling 2d20. And it was like, okay, so a 10 means you're a frog, and a 12 means you're a bird. And together, you're a frog bird. And here's the 10 things that you know how to do over time. Right now, you can flop around on the floor, right? Like, it was very much like you could just go complete chaos and just roll both, or be like, okay, pick one, and you're going to roll the other. And then you just get like these weird, every character felt like a weird hybrid mutant, but in a fun way. Like, it was always something kind of cool. But it, like, laid a lot of the progression out for you and was really just like, hey, man, don't get too attached to these guys because weird things are going to happen. But you're weird, so have fun being weird in a weird setting.
And yet you didn't like paranoia.
No. Anyways. So, yeah, that was Gamma World. Planescape.
I have not
90s.
played a ton of Planescape. I've played a little bit of Planescape. I love Sigil in a lot of the same ways that I love Sharn.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of interesting things going on. Characters are coming in from all over the multiverse. You can have, like, your knights in shining armor standing right next to a frog bird hybrid man who's flopping around on the floor for a while. But, like, the idea of the City of Doors, where like you can only get in or out through a portal, which seems great until you don't know how to make portals and you're there accidentally. Is cool. It's just a cool idea.
It honestly, I get a lot of, so, like, I didn't play the RPG setting. I did play a little bit of Planescape Torment on the PC back in the day. But the whole city kind of gave me feelings like Nowhere from Guardians of the Galaxy, where it's kind of this, like, just weird collection of, like, the extras from the universe, and it's like a centralized hub, but also, like, has its own distinct kind of like multiculturalism to it. But by, like, force, like, people wind up there and they're like, well, I just live here now because I can't get out.
It reminds me of an Eternal stew.
Yeah.
Where, like, you start cooking a stew and then every day you add stuff to the stew.
Yeah.
And then eventually it just becomes like some sort of mush, and the stuff that was in there before either gets taken out or it dissolves into the broth. And
it's no longer distinct things. It's just, this is perpetual stew.
Yeah. So, I feel like it's very much a place to be between adventures, though.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I would love to have a better idea. And again, like, I haven't played a ton of Planescape, but I would love to have a better idea of, like, what types of adventures you're going to have in Sigil. Right? Like, you've got you've got the factions that are running around doing their things, and they've all got, like, these very extreme personalities and stuff that they want to do. But, like, how does that facilitate a group of people going on an adventure?
Yeah. Well, honestly, to me, it always kind of felt like Spelljammer without a boat.
Right.
And
like, I need the boat.
You just hop back and forth. Yeah. You need the boat to be defined. So if that means that Sigil gets better defined, then great. But Like from the stuff I always saw was like, yep, they're just going to go hop in and out of other places, and you just kind of wind up back at your hub city, you know?
Mm-hmm. And like, that's fine if you really, really like that hub city.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like there's something to be said for like the sense of ownership that you get out of like a traveling conveyance.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, this is the thing that the party owns.
Yeah. These are my quarters, and I can express myself in my quarters or whatever.
And I will bring them to Dragonlance if I want to.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. And then Ravenloft. Ravenloft's our last one.
Yeah. So this is actually kind of a big setting for us to have left so long. Some of these recent ones we've talked about are far less popular, but Ravenloft is actually, it's been around for quite a while, and the influence of like Strahd in particular have been kind of outsized on the rest of the game. I mean,
well, it's been outsized on Ravenloft too.
Yeah. So Ravenloft generically is like, what if Frankenstein and Van Helsing were real? Like it's very much a medieval horror themed kind of setting, but it draws from like I'd say it draws from like the Universal Monsters textbook.
A little bit,
of ways. Yeah.
I think it was interesting in concept.
Yeah.
And the execution kind of left me no.
Yeah.
The concept was kind of like the opposite of the points of light that you saw in like 4th edition D&D. It's like points of darkness. You have everything is kind of dim, and then you've got these places that radiate evil.
Yeah.
Right? And the places that radiate evil are all interesting in their own ways, but everything between them doesn't matter at all.
Yeah,
and
very much so.
It feels very cobbled together.
Yeah, like if you're not at Castle Ravenloft, who cares? Your whole thing is just getting to Castle Ravenloft.
Well, and like the weirdness of going from like Castle Ravenloft to hanging out in Lord Soth's cursed forest.
Right.
So you go from like kick-ass vampire who's going to grab your cleric by the head and throw them off his castle to a guy who wears a bucket for a hat in a dark and gloomy forest. And then we're going to take a bit of a trip over to see Ankh-Toppat, which is I think just saying it is racist.
But honestly, like, I think if they had a setting just around Ankh-Toppat, that could be pretty cool. Like, just a very like Egyptian mythology heavy thing that just got diluted by being like, it's just another horror trope. I hope you like mummies.
One of my favorite ideas that I haven't had a chance to turn into a game yet is that in the late kingdom of Egypt, right, like in the original, like the old ass Egypt, ancient Egyptian archaeologists existed who were studying ancienter Egypt.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like I love the idea of playing in an ancient Egypt campaign that is studying and having to deal with like the weird shenanigans from previously ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
Right. That sounds great to me. I would play the shit out of that.
Yeah.
But
instead you get diluted, Mary Shelley or whatever.
Well, and like the guy, oh man, they updated him recently, but like if you look at some of the old books, it's seriously just like a white dude wrapped in bandages. Like it's not okay.
Yeah.
But like I do think that there is room for a horror setting in D&D.
I think honestly if they went like campier with it and just had like the Universal Monsters essentially.
Oh yeah. Yeah, give me a world that like
here is the Invisible Man, here is Dr. Mummystein, like.
Well, and it has to be cogent is the thing, right? Like you have to have it connected, and it has to be connected in a way that makes sense, right? Like there has to be some internal consistency, which I think is the thing that Ravenloft is lacking.
We opened a fantasy theme park, and
yeah, and like it isn't even necessary. Yeah, like here's our different attractions, right? Like we opened a fantasy zoo. Here, come over to the Transylvania part.
Yeah.
And then once you're done with that, you can go over to the ancient Egypt bit and get attacked by a mummy, right? Like,
Yeah.
having some sense of cohesion in how those things are put together. Like, give me a vampire empire, right? Like, give me not Strahd, but like,
Give me Blade the RPG.
sure, but like
Yeah.
the vampire empire has like a huge swath of land, and then directly lined up with that is like a lycanthrope empire, or like some kingdoms, some wilds, whatever it is, right? Like, give me a setting that kind of makes sense for like the powers that are in play, and don't have Strahd fight a guy with a bucket for a hat.
Sorry, I just got distracted thinking about Underworld.
Man, what a great, terrible series of movies.
Like, one of my favorites.
The first
Like-
Underworld is fantastic and
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a good movie, but I really
No.
enjoy watching it.
But I would watch Kate Beckinsale read a phone book. Like, it's...
Oh, for sure. But,
Yeah.
like, not even that. Like, oh, man. That, like, early 2000s, everything is black leather Matrix look.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes my inner goth kid, who is very heavily buried now, very happy.
Yeah, man. There was something about just the dumb, overly serious aesthetic
Yep.
that was like, it just reeked of someone played too much Vampire the Masquerade and
Yep.
then was given a camera and a budget.
I think that was literally what it was. Was Bill Nighy in the first one?
Oh, I don't.
I think he was. He
think
played like
so.
Kate Beckinsale's father or something. Or
Oh
sire.
yeah. He played Victor,
Yeah. Oh man, that guy just chewed scenery.
and like an early Wentworth Miller showed up in that movie. Like, there's
So
I.
good. Anyway, we're
so bad and so good.
we're very off topic. Underworld
Yeah,
should have
that's
its own role playing game setting.
That's what we're just forget everything you know about Ravenloft, rebrand it as Underworld the RPG, and Strahd's at the top of the vampire food chain, and you're good to go.
And then Josh and I are going to start an actual play podcast playing nothing but that. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of this episode of No Plot, Only Lore. If you're looking for more, you can find us at noplotonlylore.com and all the very best podcast platforms. If you liked what you heard today, please share, rate, and review the show to feed my never-ending need for attention and validation.